Blessings, my fellow Gnomians. I know it's been a while since we've done an episode, but we're back in action. So, to start this one out, I want you to imagine waking up one day and realizing that for months and maybe years, you've been giving your trust to someone who didn't deserve it. A leader, a partner, a group, a church. You remember all the times your stomach tightened, all the little red flags that you brushed off, all the moments you told yourself, I'm just overreacting. They know better. They must be right. And then it hits you. You weren't stupid. You weren't weak. You were convinced. Convinced that questioning was disloyal, convinced that leaving would ruin everything, convinced that your own inner voice was less reliable than somebody else's certainty, convinced that it was where you belong. That moment when the spell cracks and you see the strings, that's what this episode is about. Not just cults, not just extreme cases on documentaries, but the everyday, invisible force that makes those situations possible in the first place. That is bias. Bias, it's not just a political word, it's the quiet tilt in our perception that makes manipulation feel like truth. It's what lets control masquerade as love and groupthink masquerade as spiritual alignment. It's how smart, kind, thoughtful people end up giving away more power than they realize and often defending the very systems that are hurting them. In today's episode, we're going to talk about that tilt. Not to shame anyone, but to protect you, to give you language and tools that you can use in your own life, in spiritual spaces, in relationships, in online communities, anywhere someone's confidence starts to feel heavier than your own intuition. Before we dive into that, I want to talk about something going on here at the Church of Gnome. We're still growing like crazy, like always. And, over the course of this year, this little gnome experiment of ours has exploded. It just keeps being in mind blowing ways. We now have ordained ministers in over 100 countries and territories. It was just a couple months ago that I was excited to say it was 20 or 30, and now we are at beyond 100. Look at the map. I have to remind myself that this is not a glitch, or maybe it's a glitch in the matrix. I don't know. But either way, people from all over the world are putting on gnome hats and joining our community. It's humbling. It's beautiful. It's definitely overwhelming, if I'm honest. But with that growth comes a very natural question that comes up from a lot of you. It comes up, basically weekly. So there's always new people joining and people that haven't maybe seen this be addressed before or whatever, but it's the question of local groups and chapters or localized Facebook groups for people's areas and stuff. And want you to know, I totally hear you clearly that people want this. And I love that people want that. When people want to gather in person, it means that this is real to them, that it's not just entertainment, it really is community. And that's one of the deepest compliments that I could ever get from doing all this. And so that is a goal that I have to make it so people can have a way to organize locally and meet up and do some good things together. But here is where that gets far more complicated than I thought when I was first getting this started. So when a page or group pops up and it says, Church of Gnome in the title and the logo looks official, many people end out assuming that that is sanctioned by us or run by people who have been vetted by us and given authority through the Church of Gnome as an organization to run it. right now, that is not the case. So, for those who have made social media channels and groups, I love the enthusiasm. I love that you're trying to connect more with people in your areas, that you're helping spread this, um, and the connection and sharing that connection. But I have to ask to please don't make those channels look like they are official Church of Gnome channels, or there's some of these where if anyone went to them, they would just think that that was like an approved, sanctioned Church of Gnome group. And so I have to clearly let everyone know, like, the only official Church of Gnome groups and pages are the ones that are listed on our website. Do not yet have any localized city, state, country based chapters. uh, my intent by no means, I don't want to stop any of you from meeting each other. So I hope that you don't hear this as me trying to squash all of the dreams that many of you have of meeting each other and hanging out. If you guys want to meet up and grab coffee, do some good stuff in your local communities, by all means, hell yeah. If you guys make genuine connections through this community, that's awesome. And it's beautiful. I want that to happen. I want this organic community to keep growing and to grow into the real world. Um, the issue isn't people organizing and connecting, it's representation and liability. So I've gotten with a lawyer to see what it will take for me to be able to officially launch local chapters and create a framework for there to be, organized local groups, ways for people to connect on a more official capacity. um there's far more liability and far more things that I need to take care of before that can happen. So it's like, once something calls itself Church of Gnome and then insert name of place here or whatever, then we've gone into territory where leadership, liability, and responsibility, it all changes. And so once there are other sanctioned groups, uh, that legal liability lands squarely on me and the Church of Gnome as an organization. And for ones that are existing but not sanctioned by us, it still opens a door. If something was to happen through it, the wrong thing was said, done, whatever, even though I have nothing to do with them, if someone was to try to go after one of those, first they're going to try to come after me and the Church of Gnome, and I am not ready for legal fees. So that's just a headache I can't take on right now. I need proper insurance in place to cover anything that might occur before I can start allowing localized groups and chapters. Basically, anything. Some like when we approve someone to start a chapter online or in person, myself and the organization become liable for anything that happens there. And I need a lot of insurance for that, especially for how far we're spreading. We need a real, like, robust vetting process in place for anyone who's trying to start one in their local area. 'Cause there's tens and tens of thousands of you, and so many of you want to start a local one where it's there has to be a process in place. I wish it was as easy as just saying, hey, you seem like a good person, go for it. But I have to put safeguards in place to ensure that anyone that we are giving the green light to do anything like that with, that there is real kind of robust vetting in place to make sure that, this person really is in line with what we got going on here, and that they're also not going to utilize that position to control or exploit or misrepresent people. The safeguards are super important for members so that if any official group starts drifting into a direction that doesn't actually represent what we're trying to do here, that there's a way to step in and protect those members and get someone else in that position. The last thing I would ever want is to inadvertently, give someone permission to start a local group and then that person end out just not being healthy for that local community. And so we have to be honest with ourselves that in spiritual and alternative communities, these places are magnets for people who want influence more than service. Or, people will learn the language, they ride the aesthetic, they present as kind and enlightened, and then slowly, they start bending things towards themselves. We've all seen it. We've all seen the documentaries. And many of you have already lived and experienced that in other spaces. And so many of you have reached out to me or posted in our group about how you grew up in an environment like that, or even in adulthood, ended out going into a community like that, and how helpful and healthy finding the Church of Nome has been for you. And I take none of that lightly. I want the moment the Church of Nome isn't doing that is the moment that it should go away. But I want this to last far longer than myself. So I got to make sure none of that happens. So that's why I'm being slow here. I know it's exciting. People want stuff to go, go, go. But we're still pretty new here. Right now, behind the scenes, as a lot of you already know, the Church of Nome, it's just being ran by me. And I have help from my wife and my good friend that most of you know by now through his daily videos, Minister Paul Arden. Uh, we're doing this all alongside our full-time jobs and our family life. My wife and I, we've got kids. And so I myself am single-handedly trying to do all the emails, content creation, legal stuff, the behind the scenes operations, packaging, shipping orders, and much more. My wife, bless her, she's a trooper. She also has a full time job and is going to college full time and helping with our kids. And on top of all that, still managing to, on almost a daily basis, help me try to somewhat stay caught up on orders, try to make it so it's hopefully within a week that we get most of the orders out from when they come in. And Paul, he's pretty much single-handedly trying to handle all of our Facebook groups, moderation, and helping me with ideas and planning, and so we can build this to super outlast all of us. We're in the early days, and I don't want to rush into making local chapters without a very strong foundation. Otherwise, we risk creating the exact same thing that so many of you have gotten out of. And so, before we can get this really going, I need the insurance. I need far more conversations with lawyers. I need a solid application process, a vetting process, safety guardrails, and a way to make it so local chapters are able to run themselves without me needing to add that onto my plate as well. So I am asking for your patience. Super, absolutely, we are thinking about how to get local chapters and gatherings going in a safe, structured way in the future, but we are not there yet. The more that I learn about what goes into it, the more I realize like that we are not there yet. But till we are, if you're unsure about whether a group or channel is official, just go to our website. Our website has listed the only ones that are real Church of Gnome ones. And for those of you who have made those other channels, I hope you're not taking any of this as like a hit at you, because I know those of you that have made these groups and pages, it's all coming from a great place, a place of enthusiasm. And, obviously you really care about what's being built here. I just really have to ask that the titles of these groups and pages isn't misleading to people into thinking that it is an official thing. Uh, so that's that. You know, we joke a lot, we chant, not a cult. We slap definitely not a cult on the top of our website's homepage. We do it all tongue in cheek, cult adjacent aesthetics because one, I think it's funny, but also because I never want us to fall asleep at the wheel of what we got going on here. I want us to be the kind of community that can laugh at those dynamics precisely because we are watching out for them. So, bias is what makes a group drift into cult territory without anybody noticing it's too late. Bias is what makes a leader believe their feelings are always the truth. Bias is what makes followers defend a leader against their own discomfort. And bias is what turns this feels off into I must be the problem. So today we're going to look really at what bias is. We'll talk about how our brains are wired to protect the stories that we already believe or want to believe. We'll look at the way even doctors, pilots, and therapists, people whose mistakes can cost lives, build systems to catch their own blind spots. Talk about how media and social platforms quietly shape what feels obvious and how groups slowly slide from we belong together into we are the only ones who see the truth. And we'll talk about how good people get pulled into unhealthy dynamics, not because they're foolish, but because the human need for belonging, it's strong. And bias leans toward whatever, meets that need. Most importantly, we're going to talk about how to recognize these patterns in your own life, how to spot when your loyalty is overriding your intuition, when your certainty is outpacing your curiosity, when someone else's confidence is drowning out your own inner voice. So, this is not an episode about fixing those people out there. It's about giving you tools so you can love deeply, participate fully, and keep your mind and spirit your own. So you can be part of communities, including this one, without ever surrendering your capacity to say, hold on, this doesn't feel right. As we begin, I invite you to call upon a time in your life when you later thought, I should have trusted myself sooner. Not to beat yourself up, but to remember what that moment felt like, the sting of realizing you missed something. It's not your enemy, it's your teacher, that feeling, that flicker of, oh, I didn't see it. See, that's where our work begins, all right? So let's get into it. The nature of bias. Bias isn't just a slant in our opinions, it's a tilt in how our minds build reality. Your brain is not a camera taking neutral snapshots, it's closer to a film editor, assembling a coherent story out of incomplete, noisy footage. Psychologists call this a predictive brain. We don't merely see the world, we predict it first and we fill in gaps with what we already expect. Most of the time, this is helpful. It lets you read a sentence without, or even when a letter or a word is missing, recognizing a friend in low light or catch a ball without calculating out all the physics. But the same machinery that saves time can also distort truth quietly, automatically, and convincingly. So let's walk through a few of the most common distortions. I'm not trying to make it a lecture, but a way to help you notice them in your own day to day and week to week. So, one that many of you know is confirmation bias. It's the one that we think we all know, yet we underestimate it. Two people can watch the same sports game or news clip and walk away certain it proved their side right. What changed? Not the evidence, the lens. We naturally notice, remember, and search for information that fits our current story and downplay what doesn't. Online, this gets amplified. We click what we agree with, platforms learn our tastes, and our feeds become a hall of mirrors. But even offline, notice how easily you ask questions that are designed to confirm, not test. That went pretty well, didn't it? Instead of, what did I miss? There's anchoring. This shows up whenever a first number or idea pulls everything else toward it. See a jacket for $500 and the next one is $150, and now that one feels cheap, even if it's still more than you'd usually spend. First impressions work the same way. Once an anchor is down, our estimates and judgments drift around it, not around reality. There's hindsight bias. It's the after the fact confidence that, "Oh, I knew it all along." After an election, a product launch, a relationship ending, our memories, they quietly rewrite themselves to make the outcome feel obvious. We feel wiser than we were because our minds prefer tidy stories to the messy truths that many futures were plausible until one of them happened. Then memory itself, it's reconstructive. It not necessarily a hard drive. Decades of research show that details can be altered by suggestion, leading questions, or simply the passage of time. Two siblings can remember the same family event differently and both feel completely certain. This isn't lying, it's how memory works. We rebuild the past from fragments that feel right now. In group favoritism, it appears even in children randomly assigned to teams that mean nothing. Red shirts versus blue shirts with nothing at stake. Kids still share more with their color and judge it more kindly. Adults do it with hometowns, hobbies, professions, and every other label. Longing is powerful. Brains quietly bend judgments to protect it. There's also the illusion of explanatory depth. We believe we understand ordinary things, zippers, bicycles, toilets, I don't know, until we're asked to explain them step by step. And then our certainty starts to crumble. The same illusion applies to big topics. We mistake familiarity for understanding. We've heard a lot about it, so we feel like we've studied it when we've mostly just been marinating in repetition of hearing the same thing about it. What ties all this together is also speed. Nobel Prize winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman described two modes of thinking: a fast intuitive mode that reacts instantly, and a slower deliberate mode that checks, questions, and calculates. Bias lives in that fast mode. It's not evil, it's efficient. But because it feels like clarity, we rarely notice when it's leading us. The sensations are convincing: the rush of obviousness, the warmth of being on the right side, the relief of a simple story, the little spike of pleasure when we find one more article that agrees with us. Those feelings are not proof you're right, they're proof your brain just got what it wanted. Here's a simple way to spot bias out in the wild. Watch what happens to your certainty when you meet surprising evidence. Do you lean in with curiosity, or does your mind immediately start lawyering, questioning the source, nitpicking the details, changing the subject, or retreating to safer ground? When contradictory data never changes your mind, that's not strength, that's confirmation bias and a whole bunch of armor. Another cue is notice your questions. A scientist tries to disconfirm their own idea. If I'm wrong, what would I expect to see? Most of us will do the opposite. We ask, where's the proof that I'm right? And stop there. You don't need a lab coat to borrow the scientist's humility. You just need the willingness to say, what evidence would actually change my mind? Can't name any, you're not evaluating, you're just defending what you want to believe. And finally, notice the body. Certainty has psychological signatures: tight shoulders, quick breath, a narrow gaze. Curiosity feels different: slower breath, wider eyes, a little more softness in the jaw. It's not mystical, it's practical. If your body is in an attack mode, your mind is too. You're not evaluating, you are protecting your story. Why spend this much time on how bias works? Because the most dangerous bias is the one that we deny. If we assume bias is what other people do, we miss it in ourselves. If we treat bias as a moral failure, we'll hide it instead of learning from it. But if we accept bias as a normal feature of the human mind, we can design gentle counter moves. Slow down, ask better questions, invite disconfirming evidence, and keep a small space inside of us where the word maybe can still live. So, next, we're going to look at people whose decisions matter profoundly: pilots, surgeons, therapists, and how they build systems to catch their own bias, not because they're untrustworthy, but precisely because they are responsible. If trained professionals need guardrails from bias, it's a good hint that the rest of us probably do too. So, if bias is just a human feature, it doesn't turn off when we put on a lab coat, a headset, or a stethoscope. The difference with professionals isn't that they've transcended bias, it's that they expect it and build systems to catch it. That's not a reason to distrust them, it's the reason that you can trust them. Take medicine. Clinicians talk openly about cognitive traps with names as blunt as can be: anchoring, locking onto the first expectation, premature closure, got it and then stopped searching, availability, overweighting the diagnosis that they saw yesterday. A patient walks in with chest pain and it looks like the last three cases of, reflux. Anchoring whispers, it's reflux again. Training teaches a counter move. Slow down and ask, what else could it be? What would I expect to see if I'm wrong? That's not indecision, it's disciplined humility. Hospitals hardwire this humility. The WHO surgical safety checklist. It's a simple pause to confirm the patient, the procedure, the site, allergies, antibiotics. And that saved lives worldwide by just catching assumptions before a scalpel meets skin. In wards and ICUs, teams use SBAR, situation, background, assessment, recommendation, so that critical information is structured, not improvised. Pharmacists and nurses practice readbacks, repeating orders out loud because memory is slippery and bias rushes past details. Radiology departments do double reading, a random audit to catch invisible gorillas, they call it. Eyes can miss when you think you already know the film's story. In mental health, clinicians practice reflective supervision, a regular, structured conversation where a second pair of eyes asks, where might your own story be coloring the case? They watch for diagnostic overshadowing. Once a label is in the file: anxiety, ADHD, depression, it's tempting to funnel every new symptom through that. Supervision reopens the frame. If this weren't anxiety, what else might it be? What evidence would nudge us another way? The point isn't to undermine confidence, it's to keep curiosity alive when certainty feels good. Aviation learned these lessons the hard way, and then they taught everyone else. Crew resource management trains pilots to invite challenge from co pilots and cabin crew, flattening hierarchy in the moments that matter. Checklists aren't an insult to skill, they are a tribute to human limits under pressure. The sterile cockpit rule: no non essential talk before 10,000 feet, exists because our attention is finite and our minds love tangents. Cross checks, you have the controls, I have the controls. Sounds almost childish until you realize they're designed to stop the most adult mistake of all: assuming. Scientists do it too. We blind and double blind experiments to keep our hopes from leaning on the scales. We pre register studies so we can't quietly move the goalposts after peeking at the results. We use peer review so that people who don't share our pet theory stress test our methods. None of this guarantees perfection, but it guarantees friction. The good kind, the kind that makes bad ideas spark and fall away before they burn everyone. So if you listen closely, you'll hear common grammar. Expect bias, slow down at the decision points, invite another mind into the room, use structure when stakes are high, and create moments where it's safe to say, I might be wrong. This is why pointing out that even doctors, pilots, therapists, they can be biased. And that shouldn't scare us off their expertise. It should increase our trust. The most trustworthy people aren't the ones who claim they're never biased, they're the ones who plan for it. Here's the bridge to the rest of us. If the pros need guardrails, then our everyday choices deserve a few of those too. And if bias can tilt a single memory, imagine what happens when millions of tilted memories compare notes in real time. The result is the feeling many of us live with daily: two groups staring at the same world and seeing different planets. Part of this is old. History is full of moments when shared fear and certainty ran ahead of facts, neighbors reinforcing neighbors until rumor hardened into truth. Look at the witch trials, a handful of ambiguous events interpreted through one lens, then amplified by authority, ritual, and repetition, or eras when suspicion was a civic virtue. People learned to read normal dissent as proof of hidden threat. Bias scales because belonging scales. Once your group decides what's obvious, your brain relaxes into the comfort of that consensus. But something newer is at work too. Modern media ecosystems are bias accelerators, and not because everyone is malicious. They're built on attention, and attention, it turns out, is easiest to win with certainty, simplicity, and emotion. Consider how a single event gets framed. One outlet centers the chaos, another centers the context. One headline says surge, another says stability, each cherry picking time windows and comparators that make the story lean in the direction that they want it to. None of this requires lying, it requires selection. What to include, what to leave out, which expert to quote first, which image to lead with. You and I, we consume the piece and feel the buzz of obviousness, not noticing that an invisible hand arranged the furniture before we even walked in. Social media takes that furniture and bolts it to the floor. Platforms learn what keeps you scrolling and steadily remove frictions between you and more of the same. You linger on a video that matches your take. The system will serve you 10 more of those. You comment on a post that irritates you. The system interprets your irritation as interest and feeds you a diet of exactly that flavor. It's not necessarily trying to polarize you, it's trying to retain you. Polarization is a profitable side effect of this. And two well documented psychological effects thrive in this environment: illusory truth. Repeated claims feel truer, whether they are or not. A headline you've seen 5 times occupies a different emotional space than a correction that you've seen once. The availability cascade. The more people talk about something, the more plausible and urgent it feels, because your brain confuses loud with likely. Add visuals and the effect deepens. A single striking clip can define a narrative for millions without context. Where was it shot? What happened 5 minutes before? What was edited out? Miscaptioned images travel far faster than follow ups because our minds crave story beats, not errata. Then there's also the pace. The faster the cycle, the more fast thinking takes over. Outrage is a shortcut, so is fear. They feel like clarity because they spare us the effort of deliberation. Share now, verify later becomes share now, verify never. And Each share is a microvote telling the algorithm, more of this, please, and then the machine obliges. And then there's identity. Online, we perform our belonging. Over time, we optimize our speech for applause and avoid the tiny social tax of saying, I'm not sure. Whole feeds become costumes, signals to reassure our side and warn the other. Once you've invested in that costume, contradictory information doesn't feel like data, it feels like a threat to self. Your brain defends you accordingly. None of this requires anyone to be foolish or cruel. It only requires human nature and modern incentives. Smart, kind people get pulled into gravitational wells of storyline because the wells are deep and conveniently downhill. The result is the familiar, exhausting sensation that they must be willfully blind, when in fact they are experiencing the same cognitive physics you and I are, just on a different side of the echo chamber. So, what do we do with that knowledge without turning this into a scolding? First, we name the physics. When a headline feels deliciously confirming, that is a cue not to dismiss it, but to add one more step before believing and sharing. Can I find a version of this story framed differently by a reputable source? Can I read the thing itself instead of a thread about it? Can I pause long enough to switch from adrenaline to analysis? Second, we diversify inputs on purpose, not to torture ourselves with takes that despise us, but to triangulate reality. Seek out sources that disagree in good faith, whose business model is verification rather than velocity. Notice how the same data looks under different lights. Where the stories overlap is a better map than either one of them alone. Third, we rehumanize the other partition. Not their most extreme influencer, an ordinary person who landed in a different lane for reasons that would have made sense if we had, their week, their town, their history. The perception gap is real. Groups consistently overestimate how extreme the other side is. The quickest way to shrink the gap is not necessarily a debate, it's a conversation where nobody's performing for an audience. Dinner tables beat dashboards. Finally, we slow the cycle inside ourselves. The longer the gap between stimulus and share, the more oxygen and deliberate our minds get. Or maybe a 30-minute rule for hot stories, a habit of saving for later, not sending while our heart rate is up. When we practice these moves, we're not abandoning conviction, we're refusing to let conviction be puppeted by design. We're letting the lantern of maybe back into the room, not to dim our values, but to eliminate or illuminate our blind spots. That lantern, it's not neutral, it's compassionate. It says, I know how easy it is for me to be captured by a story. If that's true for me, it's true for you. Let's keep each other honest and human while we sort out the facts. So, next, we're going to talk about how the same forces that shape feeds can also shape communities. How good people end up in unhealthy groups or cults, not because they're weak, but because belonging is strong, and what it takes to find a path back without shame. So, very few people wake up and say, today I'm going to join a cult or an unhealthy group. What they join is a community, a place that finally seems to answer the questions they've been carrying. It feels like a relief. It feels like clarity. It feels like home. The feeling is powerful. It uses the same cognitive machinery that we've been talking about. And here's how the gravity often builds. It starts with recognition. Somebody notices you, the way you think, the ache you've been hiding. They mirror your language back to you. In social psychology, this is rapport building. In lived experience, it feels like being seen. The welcome, it can be overwhelming. Love bombing, attention, praise, invitations, purpose. Belonging lowers defenses. That's not foolishness, it's just being human. And next comes, small agreement, a modest request that fits your values, attend a meeting, share a post, read a booklet, donate, volunteer at an event. This is the foot in the door effect. Once we say yes to a small thing, we're more likely to say yes to the next. Brain likes to keep its story consistent. I'm the kind of person who helps. The request grows slowly, and your identity quietly shifts to match. The language begins to narrow. Groups that drift unhealthy often develop loaded terms and thought terminating cliches, phrases that end curiosity. That's just fear talking. You're either awake or asleep. Trust the process. Nuance thins. Complexity becomes disloyalty. What felt like clarity starts to feel like certainty, and certainty is delicious for all of us. As commitment deepens, sunk cost takes the wheel. You've invested time, reputation, maybe money. You've invited friends. The question now is to risk embarrassment or exile. Cognitive dissonance resolves in the direction of staying. If I've given this much, it must be right. Meanwhile, the group may curate information, not necessarily by forbidding the outside world, but by framing it. Outsiders won't understand. Critics hate what we stand for. Former members are just bitter. This is, a milieu a control by story rather than lock and key. Isolation, it doesn't have to be physical, it can be social isolation. Friends who raise concerns are quietly replaced by friends who reinforce devotion. Us versus them becomes a comfort, not just an ideology. Here, bias does what bias does. Confirmation bias amplifies agreement. The availability cascade makes the internal narrative feel truer with every repetition, and the illusory truth effect rewards those who can repeat the slogans most confidently. Notice what's missing from this description: gullibility. Unhealthy drift has less to do with intelligence than with unmet needs for belonging, meaning, identity, mission, certainty, community. Bright, educated, compassionate people are often especially vulnerable because they crave purpose and coherence. When a group promises both, the mind's predictive engine finally says, this fits, this is it. And bias is the glue that keeps them there. So, how do people find their way out? Not usually through humiliation. Shame hardens identity, rarely loosens it. What helps is curiosity without contempt. A friend who asks open questions and stays present when the answers are scripted. Gentle repluralizing of language, moving from the truth to here's a model that might be incomplete. Small experiments with autonomy, a skipped meeting that didn't bring disaster, private conversation outside the group that still felt human and okay, book that reintroduces some more complexity. On the inside, dissent often begins as a quiet body signal. Tension, fatigue, the sense that humor has died, laughter, paradoxically, it's a good barometer of freedom. Where humor cannot breathe, certainty has become a cage. If you're listening and wondering about your own circles or this circle, here's a list of checks, not to condemn anyone, but to keep communities healthy. Can we ask disconfirming questions without punishment? Do we have friends outside our circle who still feel like full humans to us? Does our language make complexity smaller or larger? When someone leaves, do we narrate their departure as a thoughtful choice or as proof of their weakness? Healthy groups should pass these tests in good faith, and unhealthy groups will fail a lot of them consistently while preaching that they pass. Maybe a Nomian angle of this entire topic can return us to humility. Bias isn't a defect unique to those people, it's an operating condition for all of us, especially in flocks. The antidote isn't cynicism, It's structures that keep curiosity alive, rituals of questioning, permission to laugh. The lantern of maybe held high enough that no single story can swallow the whole sky. So there's a strange quirk to being human. We can spot bias across the room and miss it in the mirror. Psychologist Emily Cronin called this the bias blind spot, the tendency to agree that people in general are biased while quietly placing ourselves in the exception column. Feels rational because we can see our own good intentions. I'm trying to be fair, but bias leaves beneath intention. You can mean well and still lean into it. A few familiar illusions keep the blind spot alive. One is the sense that we understand far more than we do, the illusion of explanatory depth. Ask someone or yourself to explain a person or toilet and watch certainty deflate into, actually, maybe you can't explain it as much as you thought. The same gap shows up with complex issues. We confuse familiarity with understanding. Another is simple overconfidence. Warm rush that comes from hearing the same take repeated so often that it begins to wear the costume of truth and add motivated reasoning where we act like defense attorneys for our beliefs, and you have a mind that sincerely mistakes advocacy for objectivity. So, how do you loosen that? Not with self shaming or grand gestures, but with small, respectful space between certainty and truth. Start by noticing your body. Certainty has posture, jaw a little tight, breath a little shallow, vision a little tunneled. Curiosity has a different posture. Longer exhale, wider gaze, a touch of more softness. When you feel the first posture, you don't have to declare yourself biased. Just grant yourself a beat. Certainty loves speed. A breath buys you time to let your slower, more careful mind come online. Language helps too. Listen for words like obviously. Everyone knows, and they're just, those are certainty's favorite adverbs and villains. Try swapping them for here's what I think. Here's why it looks that way to me. Or there's a piece I might be missing. That's not weakness, that's precision. Precision leaves room for reality to surprise you. There's also a quiet question that changes the texture of thinking. If I were wrong, what would I expect to see? Not as a trap, but as an invitation. The moment you can name a kind of evidence that would nudge you, you've shifted from defending a story to testing a belief. Scientists do this in labs. The rest of us, we can do it too. We do it at the kitchen table and in the comment boxes. It turns debate into inquiry. And then there's the practice of giving the other side its best day in court. Not a straw man that you can easily knock down, but a brief, honest version that someone who disagrees with you would recognize as fair. You're not converting, you're calibrating. Often you'll find that the strongest version of the thing you oppose isn't the one you've been arguing with. Sometimes the act of articulating it softens your edges without erasing your stance. You can also borrow time as a tool. In a fast cycle, hot takes masquerade as insight. Letting a story cool for an hour doesn't make you disengaged, it makes you less edible to whatever algorithm or outrage loop is trying to recruit your attention. When the heat drops, the details they get louder. You notice what the headline left out. You spot the frame. You remember that you were planning to eat lunch and call your friend back. Two wildly underrated reality checks. Finally, invite another mind into your thinking. Not to keep score, but to keep you company. A friend who's good at asking real questions, not rhetorical traps. Those can do for your certainty what a level does for a shelf. Reveal the tilt that you couldn't feel. You will do the same for them, Mutual humility builds sturdier convictions than solo certainty ever does. None of this is asking you to abandon your values. The point isn't neutrality, it's nuance. Beliefs that survive this kind of gentle pressure come out clearer and kinder, easier to carry without swinging them at people. And that matters because the moment we admit how easily any of us can be tugged by our lenses, the us versus them script starts to thin. Their certainty looks less like malice and more like the same human physics that tugs at all of us. So the blind spot doesn't need scolding, needs light, slower breath, a slight shift in language, and the courage to say maybe before must. Small moves, but they change the feel of a mind from closed room to open window. Once the window is open, the world is a way of coming in. So if there's one thread running through this episode, it's this. Being human means walking with a tilted compass and still choosing to walk together. None of us are as objective as we imagine. None of us have looked at all sides as fully as we claim. We are all editing all the time. And somehow that doesn't make us hopeless, it makes us neighbors. When we get that, differences calcify into enemies. But when we remember it, a door opens. The person across from you isn't a bundle of takes, they're a lifetime of moments you haven't seen. Teachers that shaped them, streets that raised them, losses that rewired their nights, joys that taught them what good feels like. If you had lived their exact life, you might see the world a lot like they do. And that isn't surrender, it's reverence. It makes room for truth to arrive by conversation rather than conquest. So here is our Nomian practice as we leave this episode. Carry your convictions with care, the way you'd carry a candle through a crowded room. Steady, warm, unwilling to scorch. Let the word maybe travel with must. Let curiosity ride shotgun with certainty. And when you feel the old us versus them script tighten in your jaw, loosen it on purpose. Ask one sincere question. Listen for the human answer. You don't have to agree to understand. You don't have to surrender to become. No, we are all more susceptible than we'd like to admit. And we are all more capable of humility than we tend to remember. That's a hopeful combination. It means there's room right now for a kinder way to be right and a braver way to be wrong. Gnome, blessings, my friends. Until next time.